And the amount of suffering they saw made them weep when they saw the connection between those early types of adversity and later autoimmune disease, heart disease, cancer, depression, anxiety. It was staggering. It was literally dose dependent, if your readers know what that means. So the more categories of adversity you faced as a child, the more likely you were to have pretty serious chronic illness by midlife. So what were those questions? Some of them you already mentioned: physical abuse, sexual abuse, of course, loss of a parent. But many of them are what I have written about as sort of common living room variety dysfunction, right? Things that I know when I was a kid, we just do not have talked about. A parent with a mental health disorder, depression or anxiety or bipolar. Parents who fought all the time. That wasn't part of their study, but in the years since, people have researched that as well. Feeling that nobody had your back. Nobody thought you were special in your family. Nobody really paid you any attention in a loving and caring way. You never got that gaze from a parent that you matter. We all know what that gaze is if we had it. Being physically neglected, what does that mean? You didn't have coats in the winter. You weren't taken to the doctor when you were sick. You were just kind of physically ignored. Fascinating study out of UT Austin, which I often quote, showed that the most significant categories of childhood adversity that are related to later chronic illness and later depression and anxiety are having been routinely put down or made fun of by a caregiver or a parent. That feeling of constant betrayal, that no matter how hard you try, something's going to come out of that parent's mouth. They're going to behave in a way that puts you down, makes you feel diminished or very small. And also emotional neglect, feeling that just nobody really cared.
Today's guest is Donna Jackson Nakazawa. And she is an award-winning science journalist and author of 8 influential books that explore the intricate connections between emotions, trauma, and health, offering innovative pathways to healing. Her latest work, The Adverse Childhood Experience Guided Journal, is based on her popular book, Your Healing Narrative, which provides readers with targeted writing techniques to recognize and reset the brain's internal narratives for enhanced neurobiological resilience. Donna's work has been featured in Wired, the Boston Globe, Stat, the Washington Post, and she is a sought-after speaker and at leading institutions such as Harvard, UCLA Health, and the Andrew Weil Center for Integrative Medicine. Welcome, Donna. I'm so happy to have you. All right. Well, today's guest is Donna Jackson Nakazawa. Welcome. How are you, Donna?
Doing great. Pleasure to be with you again.
We were just catching up because you and I had not talked for probably at least 7 years. You were referring to my daughter just being born. And I think you were part of both of the summits that I did, the Autoimmune Solution and the Thyroid Connection. You wrote one of my favorite books, which is The Autoimmune Epidemic. And now we were just discussing how you're on book 8 or 9 now. So it's a lot, but really helped, many of us with chronic illness, autoimmunity. So how did you get into this work?
Well, it's funny. I think about that looking back, because when I was an undergrad, I triple majored, and I tell you, I was blind. I had no idea what I was doing, but I triple majored in English Lit, public policy, and creative writing at Duke. And I used to go to the dean and just beg her to let me take more courses in different divisions. And it was a long, 5-year plan. But nevertheless, then when I went through a journalism program and I got to New York, I just found myself so interested in the pursuit of science, but through the translation of the written word, and to kind of close that gap between what scientists are saying and what people know, as you know, Amy, in the clinic. And I will add, I grew up in a newspaper family on one side, and on my mother's side, my grandfather was one of the founders of NIH, so the cancer research. So I was running around a newspaper growing up, but I was also running around, scientists. And you know how these things, you're raising a daughter, you know how these things trickle down into our awareness and our interests. And that's the answer.
All right. And then how sort of specifically did you get into autoimmunity, the brain, and now, your last couple of books have dealt with adverse childhood events and trauma. So, how did the journey and the path take you there?
I obviously wouldn't write all of these books if I didn't have some visceral desire to crack these gnarly problems, right? My agent always says to me, you have a gnarly problem. And when I first started reporting on autoimmune disease, that book was 2008. It was way before we were accepting that we had a real problem. There had been sort of a lag time in the research that was going on at NIH by the big guys like Noel Rose, and what people understood, and the fact that all of these environmental factors that you help patients really understand and internalize, people just didn't understand that autoimmunity was something that, if you think of it within sort of a spectrum, that there was a lot within that was within our control. Not everything, maybe, but a lot. And that could be the difference between being in a state of pure misery every day and really thriving. So I began to write about that. And when I was growing up, my dad died very suddenly. He had several autoimmune diseases. He died when I was 12. And it was really a tragedy. And he didn't get the help that he needed. And then when I was in my heart of raising young children, my kids were about 2 and 6, I had Guillain-Barré. Then I was diagnosed with small fiber sensory neuropathy, thyroid disease, thyroiditis, hypothyroidism. Then I had Guillain-Barré again. And I knew that there were genetic components, but I also felt that patients were not getting the full story on ways
that was true.
that they could work to shift factors in their environment for thriving. And that changed my life. Then I realized that the experiences that we've had in childhood, I began to work with some of the greats like Vincent Felitti and Robert Anda, who did the Adverse Childhood Experiences original survey and questionnaire, that one of those environmental factors, Amy, is what happened to us. The traumas that we've experienced, especially early in life, the way that they begin to shift the architecture of the brain and the function of the immune system. And one statistic, which I'm sure you know, the Doob study, Delisa Fairweather, that women who've had 3 or more categories of adverse childhood experiences are 60% more likely to not just have an autoimmune disease, but to be hospitalized with an autoimmune disease in adulthood. So that just started me on a whole other path.
And, having 3 is really, look, you've already identified one, the death of a parent. A lot of people don't have that one, but, actually, maybe it's a good segue into, do you want to just kind of quickly talk about that? I did have,
Sure.
I had Sarah Gottfried on my podcast who wrote her recent book, The Autoimmune Cure, and really spent a lot of time, talking about this, aspect in terms of at least autoimmunity. But, when she was going through the list with me, and for those that haven't listened to it, you can go through it. Some of the things, yes, there are things significant, like, the death of a loved one or, real physical abuse or starvation. But, some of these things are just sort of what we would, I think, considered normal childhood stuff now, right? And to 100%. Only have 3,
100%. So the original survey was done in 1995. The paper was published in 98. And 2 Kaiser Permanente physician, Vincent Felitti and Robert Anda, who was at CDC, they were the first physicians in history that we know of to ask patients, 17,000 patients, about experiences growing up. And then they looked at those 17,000 patients and they compared the number of questions, which we'll get to what those questions are, how many they answered yes to, and how well they were doing in midlife, right? Like in their 50s. And the amount of suffering they saw made them weep. And when they saw the connection between those early types of adversity and later autoimmune disease, heart disease, cancer, depression, anxiety, it was staggering. It was literally dose dependent, if your readers know what that means. So the more categories of adversity you faced as a child, the more likely you were to have pretty serious chronic illness by midlife. So what were those questions? Some of them you already mentioned: physical abuse, sexual abuse, of course, loss of a parent. But many of them are what I have written about as sort of common living room variety dysfunction, right? Things that I know when I was a kid, we just do not have talked about. A parent with a mental health disorder, depression or anxiety or bipolar. Parents who fought all the time. That wasn't part of their study, but in the years since, people have researched that as well. Feeling that nobody had your back, nobody thought you were special in your family, nobody really paid you any attention in a loving and caring way. You never got that gaze from a parent that you matter. We all know what that gaze is if we had it. Feeling that, or being physically neglected. What does that mean? You didn't have coats in the winter. You weren't taken to the doctor when you were sick. You were just kind of physically ignored. And fascinating study out of UT Austin, which I often quote, showed that the most significant categories of childhood adversity that are related to later chronic illness and later depression and anxiety are having been routinely put down or made fun of by a caregiver or a parent. That feeling of constant betrayal, that no matter how hard you try, something's going to come out of that parent's mouth. They're going to behave in a way that puts you down, makes you feel diminished or very small. And also emotional neglect, feeling that just nobody really cared. So all of those are categories. So is having someone in the family who was incarcerated. But since then, I think it's so important we add this. This study was largely a group of white middle-class Americans. Many studies, over 2,000 studies, have come out since 1998. And they show that really adverse childhood experiences, if you're listening and you didn't recognize yourself in any of those, although most of us do, the majority do, it also includes facing discrimination or racism, right? Like living in an unsafe neighborhood, not feeling safe when you go out in the world because you're facing some kind of discrimination or structural racism, having been bullied in childhood, being bullied by siblings. So there's so many different categories. We could go on all day, and not going to do that. But the point is, what do they all have in common? What's the common denominator? And I'll stop there. It is that something really hard is happening to you as a child, and you begin to feel there must be something wrong with you, but there is no adult to help you understand, to reassure you that it's not your fault. You don't have a trusted adult to help you through and reassure you that what's happening will be okay, that you can turn to them, and that it's not your fault.
Also, as you were speaking, a number of things that kept coming up for me was just the idea of safety as well. Exactly. So, I mean, I'm sure at some level that's not feeling safe, but also just, if you're in an environment that has discourse, you're in an environment where you literally don't feel safe because maybe you live in a, poor neighborhood or something like that, that safety seems to be a big one that comes up.
It is. And that's our brain is really from conception. It's really a threat detector. And the number one question that kids have in the first 18 years of life as a developing body and brain and an immune system is, am I safe or not safe? And they're taking in all the cues from the environment. And in a book that I had come out last year about youth mental health crisis, I wrote a lot about the recent science on how when that answer is unsafe, the brain wires up differently.
I was just doing a podcast right before this about, the vagus nerve and parasympathetic versus sympathetic. So you can see when you don't feel safe, you're, going to be in a fight or flight, feeling. And then that sets you up for lifelong, issues in terms of your vagus nerve and whatnot. Well, you have written a book or a journal about, I think, how we can, we're going to talk about this and you'll explain it much better than me, but I believe you call it neural re-narrating and sort of what I'm used to hearing about is like rewiring your brain. So tell us about this journal, this new book, and what exactly is what you call it neural re-narrating. Is this a term you've made up or is this a term that's out there that I haven't heard before?
It's not out there. Yes. So,
all right. It's out there now.
It's out there now. Yes. So I wrote this book because I, for years, would teach a program using writing to heal in med schools, with therapists, with parents, with educators, in the different workshops that I would do around the country. I sort of experimented and started using my skills as a science journalist and what I know about how we can use certain tricks to trick our brain to sort of open up and begin to rewire and refire. And using words is a really powerful way to do that. But we also have a lot of research showing for the last 30 years, showing that actually writing is a very powerful way to get old beliefs out of the brain, to discharge trauma, and to begin to rewire and refire the brain. And I began to see that there were ways using my skills as a journalist with writing prompts, using different mindfulness techniques, using different visualization and drawing processes, and putting them all together in sort of a staggered way so that we could dive in a little bit to people's difficult experiences safely, come back out, reground, dive in using neuroscience-based, language-oriented writing prompts. That sounds like a lot. It is. So I call that process neural re-narrating because really what we're looking for is the ability to look at our own story, connect to it with self-compassion, and using these skills, rewire the way we see our narrative so that we're able to handle stress, because we know people with adverse childhood experiences can be knocked over more easily by adult stress. That's just the nervous system is kind of wired a little more with a little more hypervigilance. So you're not knocked over quite so easily, so that you can turn to yourself with a sense of loyalty and self-care and self-compassion so that you can be more present for the people that you love around you. And really, so you can see and connect the dots, and this program is very careful about doing that, between what causes you to flip your lid now and what happened to you back then. And then we begin to develop different, very discrete mind-body phrases that capture our emotional and our physical state when we are activated. And here's the funny thing about the brain. We could talk all day about the neuroscience of it. A lot of this is happening in the default mode network, and we're trying to get it to open up and reconnect to the rest of the brain. Mm-hmm. But using these tricks causes the default mode network to kind of let go and let your brain connect up so that you have a better thinking ability when you are facing hard things. And creating this awareness in and of itself is like that part of your brain that shuts you down when you're activated, where you get caught in rumination, you can't think straight, you're judging yourself, you're criticizing yourself, you're judging others. When you do this work, you're able to catch it. And it's like your brain goes, uh-oh, you saw me. I'm not getting away with this. Like, and the brain wires up to 267 different areas. So I call this neural re-narrating. Once we're able to see those connections, catch them, we get to make other choices. And then I take readers through the different choices we can make.
And so this is not, as I know, because I've looked through this journal, and now that you're explaining it to me, I think I'll have to go through the journal myself. But
let me know how it goes.
Yeah. So this is not just simply journaling your experience, because some people in the trauma world, Peter Levine, say that when you're writing about these experiences, you can actually be reliving them and re-triggering yourself. So can you maybe give us, a very specific example of maybe something that you ask about the past experience, but then how you ask the person to begin to rewrite this and catch themselves, as you were saying?
Sure. So let's just say that the way we begin, and a lot of very well-known experts helped me to make sure that I was doing everything very safely and carefully for that reason, because yes, we don't want to trigger anyone. So one of the things that we do is I make sure that, like a scuba diver, you're going to dive like 5 feet down at first, not 50 feet down. Like, you want to make sure that you're doing this safely. So one of the things that we start with is really drawing the floor plan of your childhood home, a sketch, just for a minute. I just did a workshop yesterday with a medical school with all the med students. And, this is quick. We're just getting the gist. And we add some details and we ask ourselves.
And just real quick, can I pause you there? Because, what about those that have moved? I mean, do you consider
Yeah,
this
of course. I asked you to, yes, good question.
Is it like your childhood home during these very, first through 7 years of life, or is this the home that you identify with, like, before you went off to college? Like, what are we looking at?
Good question. And what I ask people to do is, you could have lived in many homes. I mean, some people are in military families, what have you, but think of the one that you consider to have been the source of your primary experiences. We all know what that is. We all know what that is. And so draw that floor plan. And add in details, add in little details, like what were the magnets on the refrigerator, and how many chairs were at the dining room table, and where was your toy closet if you lived there at that age, and put in the front and back door and the sidewalk or the yard. Was there a favorite tree? And then we go a little bit deeper and we start asking deeper questions. But because I care so much about safety, we do this dive, we come back, we do grounded visualizations, we do mindfulness techniques. And we write about more positive things. Then we go back in.
And that's all in the journal, because obviously people are not working one-on-one with you.
No, it's all actually so much more is in the journal than I can deliver in a workshop. You know how that is. Like there's, right. So then we begin to ask deeper questions like, who did you turn to as a child to help you feel safe? Questions like, when did you feel diminished or left out? And what happened? What were the hardest years of your childhood and why? Again, I'm like doing this. This is not how we do it, folks. We don't just like go in, I'm going to scuba dive. I'm going all the way down to the bottom of the ocean.
I was ready to go to the bottom of the ocean. I was
I know
tracking with you, like visualizing my head, all the things.
Yeah. Well, that's
like,
good.
How did you know that I felt diminished?
Exactly. So
I forgot we were on a podcast for a second.
Oh, I totally get it. But these questions, and you start to see when you are doing it live, tears spark in people's eyes. And for all of us, if we're coming to this work, we come to it for a reason, right? And it's funny because in our society, we just don't talk about these things. Sure, the science is there. We've had 30 years of research on the importance of this. and this is a tangent. Sorry, folks. I do tangents sometimes. Like,
That's
think of the
okay.
last time you had dinner with a friend and you like answered these questions for each other. We just don't go there. That is not how we parade ourselves through life. But we're all longing, there's no greater suffering than not having anyone to tell your story to. So other questions like, what did you want from your mother or your father that you never received? Like, we go there, but we begin to rewrite that through a very specific process. So one example is I ask people, okay, so we've talked about these kind of hard things. Like, if you were going to give the story of your life a book title, why would I think of that, having written 8 books, or a movie title, what would it be? And often it's very difficult in the beginning of the journal. People write things that are pretty harsh. The boy whose dad didn't like him, or the secrets I learned to keep. And then we begin to go through a process to re-narrate. And what do I mean by that? We also had many positive childhood experiences. Mm-hmm. We call in our benefactors, those people, whether they're real people, the coach, the neighbor, the grandmother, or spiritual figures, the pets, whatever they are, with whom we felt safe and seen and known and loved and valued. That feeling you had as a kid with someone who maybe, for me, it was my 7th grade English teacher. Thank you, Mrs. Lindell, who one day I lost my voice after my father died. He died in a surgery, and he wasn't supposed to die. And one day I went mute, and she put the key to the teacher's library in my palm, folded it into my hand, and told me, you go there anytime. You go there anytime. You read everything you want. Stay there as long as you need. That action took 60 seconds, but she saw me. Mm-hmm. It changed my life. To this day, I can barely talk about it. Yeah. To the high school teacher who took me on a college tour because I just didn't have parents who were going to be able to do that. My father was dead. My mother couldn't do it. She was widowed with 4 kids. And took me and said, and I know you need a scholarship, but here's this lady at the library who can help you. Whatever it was for you, building on that and bringing in more of the messages that are the antithesis to our self-criticism, the antithesis to our self-judgment, being able to spot our rumination thought cycles, which get set very early in life based on the self-beliefs that we internalized in our first 18 years of life based on the chaos or the adversity going on around us. Looking at them, naming them, creating a mind-body phrase so that when you don't have teenagers yet, but you're in the kitchen with 2 teens who maybe aren't helping you, and you've asked for the trash to go out 5 times and, whatever, and you have something due the next day for work, and you are feeling very triggered by that or whatever triggers you, and we go through that very carefully, you can call your mind-body phrase, okay, this is me, seething heart of fury, no one helps me, chest tightening. Oh, I see it. Literally, your brain's default mode network goes, man, you caught me. I'm doing it. I'm ruminating. And your brain syncs up so you can catch yourself and say whatever it is you have to say in a way that isn't pushing your stress onto the people around you, especially our kids, right? And then we go through hundreds of more exercises about really bringing in our benefactors, the messages that they have for us, the things we most long to hear, grounding in visualization, and coming out with a different title for our story. That's a long answer. Sorry.
No, it's great. I love it. And it's just so timely for me. I have 2 half sisters, one who's 14 years younger than me and one that's 24 years younger than me. And because of my childhood experiences, after my father died, chosen not to be in relation with my stepmother. And then my two sisters chose not to be in relation with me because of that. And the youngest one in November was diagnosed with triple negative breast cancer, stage 3. I haven't talked about this yet at all. And then it went to stage 4. And the first words out of her mouth, I didn't hear from her. My brother told me she didn't want to hear from me. She didn't want my advice. And after it got worse, stage 4, of course, I had reached out a number of times just saying, I'm here. If you ever need me, I'm here. And then when it got worse, stage 4, I picked up the phone and said, I have resources in terms of, places to go and things to do that are not conventional. And, I can help you. And so she did call and we've been in relation. And I just was in California with her for a week going to do these treatments. And so we've reconnected. But in that, of course, her mother is involved with her care and things like that. And so there were, I would constantly hear phone calls in her voice and things like that. And so she asked me about it and, just said, do you want to share your story with me? Because I'm proud of myself. I had concealed that from them. And I told them that like, they don't really know me. And I did that because they were innocent bystanders and I didn't want to cloud anything with them in our relationship. And so, it was really nice, as you said, to be able to tell my story. Yes. And, it will be nice to go through your journal and rewrite some of that story because, it's still pretty painful.
Actually, sometimes I think, why don't we just own up to it that nothing really matters to us more than our parents and children? It's just like we're all here, as I say, parading ourselves through, and shushing down our negative self-beliefs, like whatever they may be for us. But all of this is patterning from parent to child to parent to child. It just goes on and on and on. And what you're doing by opening up about what happened to you and by being vulnerable about it here today is you're giving your sisters, but also listeners, the permission to be vulnerable with their own story as well. And I hope what I'm doing is providing them safe tools to do that deeply and transformatively. But that is the gift that, and you have a young daughter, by doing that, it's weird how that work for you will also heal something for her.
I have definitely been on a very different sort of healing journey as of late. And, I can see it in, my relation with her. And then also just being aware of these things, right? I mean, she is adopted. And so, her very first primal experience is to be, removed from her birth mother and given to us. And so, the primal wound happening there. So I'm doing my best to not have any of that childhood.
I have no doubt that you are doing a fabulous job. I don't
know. I am human like everyone else.
Yes,
so.
And we all are. And it might help to say that, I've given, as you have hundreds and hundreds of talks to audiences, and I often ask, especially if it's a parent group, has anybody here, or even if it's like physicians and therapists, whatever, anybody here ever not said something or done something you regret with your child? I've never seen anyone raise a hand. Like, we're all in this. But here's what's key. These things that happened to you, Amy and your story, me and my story, what happened to me with my father and not having a mom during formative years for various reasons. It was only when I did that deep dive into that work that I could really heal and repair things with my own daughter, right? Like I can see now patterns that when she was young, I just would have done anything not to perpetrate those patterns.
Right.
And yet the incredible stress that was handed to me by my mother and being her parent really was something I started to hand to my daughter, partially because I had a lot of chronic illness, partially because of my high stress levels, partially because I was in and out of the hospital with autoimmune disease. I would be here one day and gone for 4 or 6 weeks. And unconsciously, some of these patterns were repeating for different reasons. But when I went in to do my own healing work with my mom and my story and faced up to just how pervasive some of these beliefs were for me, that I really didn't matter, that I really didn't belong, that my mother really didn't want to hear what I had to say, like that fear that I had to always parent other people, even when I was dying. Like, it was not something I'm not going to go into now, but there were pieces of this sensation, this feeling that were coming out. We leak. We leak our story. We leak the self-beliefs. We leak the physical vagal state. We leak the heart pounding. We leak the sympathetic dominance in our nervous system. And we have a lot of good research on that. Like, the best way for children to calm down is if you have the lowest heart rate in the room. It's magic. How do you get there? You have to go through your own story. There's no way to it but through it.
And so how long, obviously everyone's going to be an individual and work at their own pace, but, was this designed, as a 8-week thing, as a finish it in 6 months, finish it in 2 days? I mean, how long do you kind of think someone should take to go through this?
I would do about 20 minutes a day. And that's actually what the science says. 20 minutes a day for even just 4 days is linked to fewer doctor's visits, greater immune function, different changes for asthma patients, PTSD. We have 30 years of research on the power of writing to heal. The great James Pennybacker started this research field. So I would say 20 minutes a day. Try to do 4 to 6 days a week, but it is a journal where if you can't, because you have 2 young children and a busy job, it's okay to pick up 3 or 4 days later. It's very module oriented, right? And at that rate, it would take you probably about 6 to 8 weeks to do the book. I have heard from people who went through it very quickly. And they were fine doing that. They just got in a deep dive. They didn't want to stop. The stories were coming. The answers were there. And they didn't want to stop, or they were really, really anxious to feel better quickly. But I think the fastest you would want to do this is over a 2-week period.
As people are going through this, and if they have questions, or it's, it has triggered something, and maybe the, opposing exercise to downregulate isn't working for them. Do you have, any coaches, or are there maybe support groups or people who are doing the workbook all at the same time popping up? I know the book is relatively new.
The book just came out. It's only been out 1 minute, but I would like to do that. I'm setting up a Substack with that in mind. So be patient, people, because I'm on deadline for another book for Random House, and I'm doing everything that I can. But what you say is so important, and I bow to that need that we have to be in community, right? And so that is where I'm going by starting a community on Substack. But in the meantime, what I am telling people, and I'm very careful about this, like you will read a lot in the book about how to keep yourself safe through this process. And if you have any questions about whether or not this is the right time for you, then the way that some people are doing it is they're buddy systems. I'm hearing from a lot of people who are doing the buddy system. They do it with a trusted friend or sister or relative. One family of 4 is doing it together, who I heard from this week, 2 parents, 2 young adult children. This is not really for kids under 18. That's a different kind of care that we want to give, and that's not what this journal is for. But also, I have heard from hundreds of people who are using it to take to their therapist. So they have a coach, they have a therapist, or some practitioner, or some to their physician. And I'm hearing from therapists about how helpful it is to them that their clients are using that, what they're learning about their clients through this tool. So all of that is happening. But yes, my dream is to create a community around it. And I put out my first couple of Substacks, and that's kind of where we go as writers now, to develop that kind of community around something that we're doing. But yes, and if you feel you're into it and you need to take a break, take a break. Just, call a friend, call a trusted practitioner. That said, I have never yet heard from anybody. Well, anyway, I don't want to jinx it, that it was too much. I have not heard from anybody. And I will say, who helped me with this is a household name. He went through the journal very carefully to make sure that it would never be overwhelming for anyone. Is like an absolute hero of mine, Dan Siegel, very kindly went through it and had, tweaks just for that reason.
And I know you don't work one-on-one with people, but it does sound like you're getting some feedback. So is there a, particular success story that you'd like to share with us?
A success story that has meant a lot to me is someone who was not really able to see how the things that happened to her with her parents growing up had led to her panic events in public or when trying to voice herself or speak up. And after doing this work, the panic events went away better than any medication. And she had tried many. Another success story is someone who her mom died of cancer when she was 16. And she just was not able to figure out why she was such a fixer, and she couldn't handle not being able to fix things for her kids, especially her daughter. And doing this work helped her to figure out that sense of dread when there is something unfixable, because she was associating it with this loss. She could not help her mom. And she was with her mom for 2 years when her mom was dying. And so these are small things. You could have a dozen of these revelations doing this work. Does that make sense? Like different things apply to different situations, different people. I've heard from a lot of people who understand their relationship patterns better, like why certain things that their spouse is saying or doing are so triggering. This is way beyond love languages, right? This is like, oh, actually, and I'll be personal here, it for me, because whatever, if I feel that my husband doesn't want to hear what I have to say, I'm like, what do you mean? The thought bubbles that we put over other people's heads, thinking we know what they're thinking. Some of the work that I've seen through this is that people will tell me in their relationships, they're not ruminating over what their partners are thinking. And that this in and of itself, by catching their rumination, allows them to go and ask, like, wait, is this really what you're intending right here? Because this is how it feels. And to go like, well, that is not the thought bubble over their head. That's not actually what they're thinking. So I would say some of the work that means the most to me, well, two areas are with parents whose kids are struggling. With young med students, I've worked at a lot of med schools doing this. And the story of the wounded healer, right? We come to these professions, yours and mine, and we're certainly examples of this, because in a way, doing the work we do to try to heal others, it's a way of making meaning out of what happened to you. Because if you are a trusted resource, then you are showing up for people, Amy, every day in a way that unconsciously, subconsciously, that child long ago for you needed someone to show up for them, right? Mm-hmm. And we're making meaning, but it can backfire on us because we're suppressing our own feelings and needs, our own story, while we help everyone around us, our kids, our partners, our clients, our readers, whatever it may be. So working with med students and therapists has been really, really powerful for me. I could give you many more stories of people who come to me with stuff, but that's probably enough.
This might be kind of a silly question, but I'll again ask it selfishly as I am going to embark on this. I know the publisher probably didn't want to put in a lot of extra pages, but have you had feedback that people can fit their stories into the area provided, or do you recommend that they have another notebook, or can they use a computer? Or
I love you.
Along
those discrete questions.
Along those lines, because I've heard, like typing and writing is different. So do you actually recommend that the person is physically writing and not typing? So
I do, unless there's some reason why you can't, for some people, writing is uncomfortable for whatever physical reason, maybe autoimmune disease, maybe something else, arthritis. If it's easier for you to do voice activation on your computer, this is okay too. No one has said they don't have enough room, and I'll tell you why, because I am a baby step person for the reasons that we discussed. We want to take baby steps. So I will break questions into levels. Like, here's a little bit of this question. Here's a little bit more. Now we're going to go a little deeper and I'm going to ask you this. And don't worry, we're going to come back later and we're going to address these more deeply. So think of this as many, many different gentle layers to get to where we're going. So I haven't heard from anybody. That said, sometimes when we pick up our pencil, what we're looking for here is really expressive writing. You just want, literally, don't think too much. Look at the prompt, start writing, keep your pencil moving quickly. Don't lift it off the page. Just take dictation from your mind to the tip of your pencil. Keep moving. Don't worry about mistakes. Don't worry if you want to cross something out, that's fine. Just don't judge yourself as you're doing this, because there's no right way to do it at all. If you want more paper, absolutely stick paper in between the pages and so that you have more. After people have done the journal, I've heard people want to do like a whole second iteration and start journaling, start making another book for themselves. So you can do it any way you want. I've seen people tie ribbons around their journal, whatever, put stickers in it. If you are crafty, man, go for it. Add pages, add stickers, draw. There are lots of drawing exercises in the book. Add ribbons, glue things on there. Make it yours. This is your story. Make it yours.
Before we move on, we're going to quickly just talk about your next upcoming book. But is there anything that you feel like we didn't go over with this that anything else you'd like to say about it?
What I want for people is to come away from doing this process and kind of wake up with on a practical level, like a different book title or movie title for their life, to see this in a different way and to calm their nervous system in such a centered way that they're able to soothe themselves much more quickly, even when there is a lot of chaos. That these tools allow you to soothe yourself, because we are living in pretty difficult times. And I think we need more tools. And this is an underutilized tool that kind of takes meditation a little deeper. And it's one of the only tools I know that allows you to be in the past, present, and future safely without ruminating at the same time. There's nothing else that really allows us to do that. So that's my goal, is that people kind of wake up with a greater sense of loyalty to themselves and have these tools for dealing with overwhelm so that they're able to be more present for themselves and the people they love and the work they really care about. The next book. All right. I mentioned rumination. So I am writing a scientific deep dive into rumination, what we know about it in the brain, why it's so bad for us, the effects it has on our physical and mental health, what we can do, why we're all doing it more than we were. We're all ruminating more. That's kind of scary because it leads to long-term, downstream effects that we don't want. Higher depression, higher anxiety, more reactivity, more chronic illness. It can take you longer to, heal after surgery, and more cognitive decline. Like, who wants that? I don't want
Nobody.
Nobody wants that. So it's something we're doing more and we want to do less. So my goal, because I do like an early problem, is to figure out how we do less of it and what that means on a neural integration level, but to make it easy and inviting, that's the hope as a writer, so that people feel called to do that work and to turn these dark ruminative energies that don't serve us into something more purposeful and powerful, more creativity, more imagination, more ingenuity, more sense of flow. Those same energies, that same effort, that same time that we're using and wasting on rumination is actually available to us if, again, we get the brain to sync up in different ways for our own growth and creativity and all the different things that we might imagine that we could possibly do in our lives.
And so that book is called Mind Drama, and that will be out
2026. Yes. I've got to finish writing it first.
Crazy how early we have to write books.
Right.
And then this book, the Adverse Childhood Experiences Guided Journal, it's available now wherever books are sold, so you can pick up a copy. And before we part ways, I like to ask my guest 3 ways that you would let or advise our listeners to take back their health.
Excellent.
Just today, immediately.
Immediately. Well,
immediately. The second they finish this podcast, how can they start taking back their health?
So the first thing I would say is this is as true as it is cliche. Let me say it that way. Start every day by yourself in a chair, hopefully in nature, meditating, grounding yourself with your breath. Do it in bed if you have to. But I literally, after 20 years, cannot start my day without my 20 minutes in the garden or staring at the garden. Just do it. I know it's hard. I used to have to do it in the closet when my kids were little. So not quite sitting in the garden. But there is nothing that the brain likes better than to detach from all the busyness. It actually needs that. It needs that quiet. However you want to meditate, maybe you don't want to meditate. You just want to sit alone and be alone with your own non-ruminating thoughts. But take those 20 minutes for yourself, however it has to happen, to quiet your mind. I think that's really one of the most important things. And a second thing I would say is really look at your own story. I don't think we need more research, but we have more than 2,000 studies about how the trauma and adversity, and as Amy said, sometimes things we don't even think of as adversity, but that chronic sense of unsafety growing up or in our lives now, how it shifts our nervous system and our self-beliefs in ways that make it pretty darn hard to be emotionally and physically healthy unless we look at those connections. I've written 8 books, people. This is probably the number one factor for healing. I've interviewed thousands of patients and individuals as a reporter for newspapers, magazines, books. This is key. You cannot not do it and hope to get to the healing that you're looking for. And the third thing I would say is that for me, and I know you are a big proponent of this, what you put in your body really matters. For me, having been in and out of a wheelchair for 7 years while my kids were little, everything you put in your body really, really matters. The nutrition you put in your body, what you eat, and that includes those emotional messages that you send yourself, right? Like, catch the messages you're sending to yourself all day. Just as you want to eat a clean diet, all of the different autoimmune things that you suggest, you also want to catch those environmental triggers that you're sending yourself. What an idiot I am. How stupid I am. Oh my God, I wore the wrong thing. Oh, wow, I messed that up. Oh, I'm not really lovable. Whatever. We are walking around in a neighborhood that is forever rainy in Seattle in our own heads.
Yes.
And take a look at that. Those are my 3 things.
Okay. So we're going to be definitely, conscious of those thoughts that we're thinking because they are nonstop. And I look forward to doing this journal. So where can people find you if they're interested in learning more?
Yep.
Or getting the books. Yeah.
Pretty easy, DonnaJacksonNakazawa.com. And I'm sure in the show notes, you'll spell Nakazawa, so I won't bother with that. But honestly, If you put in Google, there's only one of me. So it's not that hard to find, even if you spell it wrong. But yes, you can see all my books there. You can see all my courses. I have Writing to Heal courses based on this same idea of writing about our trauma. One is Breaking Free from Trauma, and one is Your Healing Narrative. And Breaking Free from Trauma is just a little weekend course that you can do in like 2.5 hours. So there's so much more there. And you can always email me at my website. There's a contact sheet. And and all my books are available where all books are sold. And this book just came out on an audio as an Audible. So if you are someone who doesn't want to do it in the journal itself and you want to make your own little, and you want it's not my voice, it's someone else. It's whoever they chose, the narrator. But I love that. We're all different learners. So that is just another resource out there.
Yeah. Wonderful. Well, it was so good to see you after so many years, and I'll be sure to have you back on in 2026 and talk about mind drama.
Thank you. I better get writing.
I want to thank this week's guests for sharing their time and knowledge, and thank you for listening. To read the full show notes for each episode, which include a summary, timestamp, quotes, and any resources mentioned, please visit amymyersmd.com/podcast. Lastly, if you've enjoyed this episode, I'd love if you would leave a rating and a review on Apple or Spotify, and we'll select a few to read out loud in a future episode. Tune in next week to hear from another inspiring guest as we help you take back your health.